Great. So thanks so much for joining us. Like I said, this is the future steps in mental health training for school-based staff. We're going to be discussing some research questions, both in terms to assess the gaps in the current training available, and also assess critically to what extent that offer needs to address everything, and any gaps in mental health support in schools. We're going to do, like I said, some discussion-based activities. Then we're going to go for a comfort break at around 11:15, and then we're going to talk about exploring the wider support networks, and we'll finally close and talk about the next steps of the research. So can I ask everyone to go to my report? I'm going to share the link in the chat. And I'll explain the activity there. Can you let Alex know if you're having any issues accessing the Miro board? Thank you. Okay, so as we go through these activities, I want you to have the overarching research question in mind of what do school-based staff need now and in the future for mental health related training and development in order to create an environment where staff and pupils can thrive. Now, there are constraints to this question where obviously we can't expect teachers to do it all, but the idea is to think ahead of a scenario where school-based staff receive training that is better suited to having better tools to address those needs and situations that they will inevitably face in schools. So if everyone can go to 1A, we're going to do that activity first. The question is for all of you is, what are the most common gaps in the knowledge or abilities of school staff in terms of supporting young people's mental health? So what I want you to do is take one Post-it note, one of the blue ones, fill in your ideas. You can create newer Post-its, and then we're going to have a discussion based on that. So I'm going to give you maybe 3 minutes just to get started on writing those Post-it notes.
If you double click on the blue Post-it, it will bring up a cursor and you can start typing. There's a list of stars at the side. If someone else has made a point that you love, rather than writing it again, you can just pop a star on their Post-it note. If you click, you can pick it up and drag and drop. There's also a map in the bottom right-hand corner where it says 20%. If you click that, it'll bring up a map there. Yeah, and you can use that to navigate around the board, the Miro board if you need to, and also to zoom in.
Yeah, right now we're working on this part of the map.
Yeah,
thank you.
Just those blue Post-it notes.
Okay, so thank you so much for everyone adding to that. Now we're going to tackle 1B. The question is, what barriers or challenges are school staff, and I want to highlight school staff, not necessarily school leadership. What challenges are school staff facing in terms of accessing the training they require / want to meeting young people's mental health needs? This may be anything from we saw like that some schools don't offer CPD, or it may be lack of knowledge, just based on your experience and your understanding. Like equally, I'm going to give you about 3-4 minutes, and then as you go, if you see any comments that you really like, feel free to add stars. I'm going to create more stars so that you can access them quickly. Okay, hopefully everyone had a chance to add some ideas. Now we're going to have 5 minutes to feedback from what you've seen and read from other people. If you have any pressing comments now.
I think one of them is very pressing, to understand the relationship between well-being, connectedness and learning.
Thank you. Do you want to develop that a little bit?
I mean,
how do you feel the current courses are not offering that?
I think I'd like somebody else to say that.
No problem.
I'm talking to
Yeah,
you.
that's
Anna? Anna,
Oh, yeah. So one of the ones that we'd put up was around, on the left-hand side, I think was around like the missing middle in terms of services. So often schools do a really cracking job of supporting young people early on. And then often when young people tip into real crisis, it's quite apparent what needs to happen. But it's those who don't fall necessarily in either of those brackets and are in the middle, and actually schools are being left holding the baby often in that respect, but without the knowledge or the stacking up behind of other agencies to help contain that and support some of that. So I think it's kind of the early intervention often feels like it's easier to do and they do well, but then once children are needing that next tier up, that becomes more difficult, I think, and knowing how to support those young people best becomes quite hard.
totally agree. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to the point I made about keeping children safe in education. You know, when I started teaching, it was very clear to me that, you know, and it said it in the national curriculum, all teachers are teachers of children with special educational needs. And I think the same thing applies to mental health and well-being. And it fits, and a lot of schools don't get this yet, but it fits within that safeguarding spectrum that schools are responsible for. And I think my major concern is that we do a lot of training and invest a lot of support in a handful of people. And if those people move on from that school, the school loses its expertise. And actually what we should be doing is working with the DfE to potentially create content so that when all schools do their update on keeping children safe in education at their September inset, we ought to be creating a module with it, maybe procured by the DfE, that actually fits with all of that. So all schools, all teachers, all staff in school are getting the same message and understand that mental health and well-being is part of that safeguarding spectrum.
Yeah. So that almost like that base level of training, so that you've got something to work with the whole staff body rather than that kind of single person dependency. That's
right, yeah. And you know, working on a more general level rather than the specialist level that a lot of the courses I saw in the document were at a sort of specialist level, even the sort of lower level courses. I mean, what we need to do is try and equip all of our teachers with an understanding of things that concern them in the way that some of their students present. You know, my daughter went to an outstanding secondary school, but her friend ended up in a special facility with an eating disorder because the school didn't intervene early enough. And that's not the teacher's fault. It's just that the teacher didn't know what they were facing or how to deal with it, where to get the support. You know, and as a teacher, you're trained to deliver a curriculum. You don't necessarily have this range of expertise. And I would add to that, you know, local expertise of where to go as well, because, you know, I listen with envy at the sort of support that has been described by Birmingham colleagues. But, you know, in a unitary authority like Blackpool, which is where my headship was, we don't have that depth of service. That's not that the local authority don't want to do a really good job. It's just there aren't the people to do it. So I think the more we can take vagaries of the system out of play by putting some training in once a year, which is more generic training that puts staff in a position where they can identify and then refer on, I think is probably the way to go.
Yeah, you make some really, really good points. Okay, I'll take one more comment from Anna B, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. I was nodding away then, Andy. I thought absolutely, yeah, spot on. And I think in terms of that, it's also building the confidence of staff to know what that looks like. So yes, keeping children safe in education, mental health sits firmly in there. But, you know, when I do training sessions, around those risk and protective factors. And actually, protective factors can be as simple as, you know, knowing tomorrow's another day, knowing that having a laugh is a protective factor and that all staff have a part to play in that. As their role in mental health, that's where you start to see them sort of that aha moment of going, oh, okay, I get it. I can see it isn't about mental illness. It's about that sort of resilience-based approach of, you know, the risk and protective factors and the part that everyone can play in that. And I think as well, sometimes understandably, our education staff take a kind of a very education-based approach to strategy. So we've got an anxious child, we need to shove in because this is what we do in maths or English, we plug a gap through some strategies and a worksheet, and we do that really quickly, and actually the schools do that really well, that's their job. But the thing is, we then take that to anxiety and think, right, we need a worksheet, we need some strategies to plug the gap and fix it, and it doesn't work in the same way. And I think there's the real nuances of kind of helping education staff understand, everybody understands what that means, what their role is, and how it's everybody's responsibility. And I think there's more work to be done on the description of what that looks like, and almost sort of hand holding around that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It almost sounds like there's a need for a descriptive toolkit of like not only how to recognize and how to address, but also how to accommodate, and the nuances between those different needs. So we've made some points that kind of like bleed into 1B. Does anyone want to make further points from the pink post-its in terms of the barriers and challenges faced by school staff willing to address this? Go on, Mel.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's often a sense of mental health kind of being retrofitted in terms of its impact on learning as teachers come across that once they're in situ in schools. And my sense is that it's really a neglected area in teacher training, because there needs to be an understanding of emotional availability to learn is fundamental for then all of that differentiated, creative, wonderful teaching to have its effect. I think there's, you know, the well-being is the, you know, I say it's like the plinth on which schools should rest, but ultimately that priority isn't necessarily given to those people moving into that profession. And so, yeah, there seems to be sort of this retroactive understanding of that, but then perhaps that's then what comes is a dip in confidence that staff don't then feel resourced as to quite what to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a key understanding. Can I ask if anyone has any further points? Yes, Andy?
Yeah, I think the funding one is a point that's worth making. I think at the moment it's very difficult for schools to do anything in terms of trying to find funding to get people out, but also the cover back in school. It's difficult to find money to pay for that cover, but it's also difficult to find staff to do that cover. So I think it's worth us knowing that. But I do think that, you know, my work with schools is that quite often the academic takes precedence over the sort of mental health and well-being of students, and it's almost as if in some cases we've become slaves to league tables and performance, and you know, students struggling with their mental health is almost become collateral. And it really concerns me. One of the things I'm going to be doing over the summer is sitting down to write a book about what I did in my school in Blackpool, which was just as I've just heard, you know, building a well-being foundation or a plinth that actually raises a lot of our students above the waves, if you like, that they flounder under in terms of an academic focus in school. And if we can lift those students and actually give staff a better understanding of what they came into the profession to do, using their flair and skill as practitioners, we can actually prevent a lot of mental ill health before we get to crisis point. So, you know, I think there is work to do around all of that, and my concern is that we need to recalibrate that so we get schools to understand that well-being and good mental health is the starting point, and that we build learning on that rather than trying to flog staff and kids to perform when we know they're not able to access that learning for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, one thing, and this is a bit anecdotal, but very related, but I guess one thing that I always struggle to understand is why there are breakfast clubs, and it's like very well accepted that children need to be fed in order to learn, but that also applies to mental health and well-being, and it's not taken with the same kind of seriousness. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your thoughts and reflections on this. We're going to move on to our next activity, where we'll discuss the CPD landscape and what is available. As you read on the review, it's what the case studies we're looking at are very top level, high intense courses available to school staff, because that way we're looking at the kind of like the grand scheme of what is being designed for what mental health specialists should be able to focus, and hopefully that should trickle down into the school culture. Obviously, that's not the case. So what we'll do in this next activity is we'll split into 3 breakout rooms. I'll assign a case study to each group. I'll share the links to those case studies in a second. They're just PDF files, so they should be able to be easy to access for everyone. And I want you and your groups to address these following questions. After you take some time to read the case study, which is less than 1 page long, to think about, can you identify 3 key strengths of that training offer for school-based staff, 3 key weaknesses of what you see of that school training offer, and any gaps that you feel like those courses aren't covering. So I'll share in the chat. Basically, it's 3 strengths, 3 weaknesses, and 3 or any gaps identified in those courses. The courses are identifiable, and they've just been chosen for the purpose of this roundtable. So let me just share that link. 1 second. This is going to be case study 1 for breakout room 1. In the meantime, can you please access that document? This is case study 2 for breakout room 2. And this is case study 3 for breakout room 3. Hey everyone, I hope you all made it through the tunnel and you're back. I'm sorry, it happened in our group that someone was cut short. So apologies for that. I think most of us are back. Anna, we're missing, oh no, there you are, Anna B. Okay, so we're going to take the next 10 minutes to kind of discuss the findings that we had from each group. I was personally on case study 3, which was the mental health lead from Progressive Minds, and the course is Senior Mental Health Lead Training for Strategic Leadership. I hope, Anna R, that you're okay. I'm going to nominate you to kind of socialize what we discussed, and I'll pitch in if there's something that you don't add or something. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Andy said feel free to wade in.
How much time do we have for this, Anna?
To avoid that. Sorry, Alex?
Do you want to just be clear on the timings for this?
Yes, we're just going to spend 10 minutes having this feedback session. So if you could do a really brief summary, that'd be really helpful.
So we were talking about some of the strengths, because this was obviously one of the trainings, I think, through the sense we made of it was through the DfE kind of model of training. So, you know, being hung on the public health approach is really clear. It gives some really good areas through which to be working. And I guess what we talked about was how the process in that particular training gave some training, but was also then trying to sustain things afterwards through pods, support networks. And our observation was around the importance of connections, genuine face-to-face interaction, so not just online, local connectivity to be able to create sustainability, but also then reflecting on how the task with that DfE, the senior mental health lead role, is really about leadership and having a plan and a strategy in place and an audit process, not necessarily about clarifying your underlying philosophy around mental health in your school and well-being in your school, and therefore how all your interventions might lead and all your work might lead from that place. Does that summarize it roughly, Andy?
Great, thank you. Case study 2, Dean?
Yeah, great. It was a really good discussion. So there's a lot, I've got a lot of notes, but I've tried to kind of pick some of the main points. So there was some, you know, the course was Future Learn and Open University. It was a 15-credit postgrad module, just to kind of set the context. It was, it had mentioned child development, human brain development, and the impact of significant people, which was good. It was a 12-week course, which was kind of short, but you know, but kind of doable, but still gives time to go into some depth. It covered a lot of conditions, coded conditions as well, in a short period, and the associated behavioural issues with that. And it had covered things like gender identity, sexuality, and loss and bereavement, which are really important. Some of the weaknesses of the course, you know, despite having kind of child development, human brain development, there was a lack of real good focus on promotion of mental health and protecting mental health, and things like the importance of belonging, and then it, you know, then the rest of it, besides the bit around child development, was kind of very disorder focused and focused around kind of, you know, the kind of signs and symptoms and dealing with disorders. Yeah, and then some of the gaps. Then, you know, it was a 15-credit module. Is it part of a bigger program, or is it a one-off thing? Is it trying to do perhaps too much in one 15 credit? It's trying to kind of cover, you know, too much in, and you don't get the real depth that you need. You know, was there an overplaying of behaviourism as a kind of underpinning theory, but it didn't really explore whether those concepts would be discussed. Agency and children's participation wasn't mentioned either. And then because it was a module that was kind of open to so many people working with children and young people, quite a diverse workforce, we were wondering, like, you know, all those people have different roles, different contexts, different backgrounds, different everything. Who is this course really written for? Is it going to speak the language appropriately and you know, to all of those? Because it was for nurses, for teachers, for parents, for such a diverse range of people. That would it really align to what those different professional roles required? I think those were the main things, but anyone else, please chip in if I've missed anything.
Thanks, Dean. And someone from group 1, I don't know, Alex, if you want to nominate someone or if you want to take it.
I can give a brief summary and then do pick me up if I've missed anything or misrepresented anything in my group. We felt we were doing the Minds Ahead and Leeds Beckett University School Mental Health Specialist PG Dip MA. And we felt that there were lots of strengths to this. We really liked that there were opportunities to be strategic, and that it was kind of, it allowed a little flexibility about who might actually adopt the role within a school setting, whilst also providing quite a good framework of sort of supervision and support. We like that you could do it part-time, and that you got to meet colleagues from different settings as well and different educational phases as part of the training. And And we also thought it was good that it was based in the latest educational research and theories, which gives it that sort of credence, is always kind of good currency in terms of taking forward training and feeling that there is a sense that practically it will work. In terms of some of the challenges, we raised some questions about the school-based mentor, and whether, you know, what schools would do if it was difficult to find the right person to take on that role. And that kind of led to a wider discussion around actually, in terms of which school staff are nominated for these kind of roles, how able they are to then implement their work depending on the level of responsibility and influence that they actually hold, and how often, if these kind of roles are given to someone who isn't necessarily, for example, a key member of SLT, the school really needs to have whole school buy-in and full support from SLT to empower that person to deliver change, because otherwise they may do a lot of training and development and then hit a brick wall when it comes to actually driving a program of change within their school setting. We also said that there was some kind of, when you're looking at kind of colleagues learning from each other across different educational phases, there are some unique challenges to specific phases. And so while it's helpful to have the discussion across phase, it's also important to be able to share with people from your environment where there might be specific challenges to the type of setting that you work in. For example, in FE, where they might be dealing with both child and adolescent and adult mental health services at the same time. In terms of gaps, we also talked about the about the importance of sort of academia, education and therapeutic approaches aligning properly and speaking the same language rather than kind of seeing themselves in different silos. And we also talked about the need for scaffolding around this sort of work to make sure that it isn't a tick box exercise, and it while the training is really high quality, it actually then leads to an embedded long-term impact within a school and positive change for young people. Is there anything I've missed or not got quite right there, my group?
That was perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we only have a couple, like 4 minutes, but I want just initial impressions that you have just from hearing those reflections from an array of courses available. I want to ask if you have any impressions about the gaps or the strengths that stand out to you. Anyone want to add to that?
I think we all might be ready for a break.
Yeah, all good. Okay.
If anything comes to mind, pop some ideas down in the chat. Feel free to do that. But I think it might be a good moment, Anna, to take 5 and get a cup of tea.
I agree. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to move on to our next activity. We've talked about the gaps and challenges that school-based staff face in terms of the skills that they have, and also the strengths, the weaknesses, the gaps that currently available courses have. Now we're going to focus our conversation towards the wider support networks. Okay, so I want you to think, who should be involved in ensuring that gaps in training provision are filled? You have a list of different stakeholders and different entities, and I want you to prioritize them. So the first one should be that entity has the highest responsibility in ensuring that those gaps in training provision are filled. So I'm going to open voting now and just prioritize out of those 8 options, including government and local government, local health services, mental health professionals, universities or research organizations, charities, school or trust leaders, the DfE, and other. Alex, I can't see the chat, so if anyone asks any questions, can you take care of that?
Can do. Looks okay at the moment.
Oh, great. We're starting to get votes from one person, I think. Once you finished your prioritization, make sure that you click, I think it's submit, just so that we are able to see your results. Yeah, very good.
Thanks, Andy. That's really helpful.
We have 9 votes in. Is that everyone, or is that is anyone still waiting to send those results?
I think that's everyone.
Perfect. Okay, that's pretty interesting. So we have at the top DfE and school trust leaders. I guess that ties into what we were saying about and Andy's comment about kind of getting that buy-in and that like real belief in building that school-wide ethos. I'm curious. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. There's traffic outside. I'm curious about having mental health professionals and charities at the bottom. Does anyone want to venture out on thoughts about that? Alex?
Prasanna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I would say they are in the bottom maybe because each setting is unique. The children who attend a setting is unique to the area, or I think the school leaders know more about who come to the setting and what are the needs that the children require, what's this level of support they require, what's the training that actually can benefit the children and support the children is more known to the school leaders or school personnel rather than the mental health specialists coming from external agencies, to be honest, because they can I feel they are able to it's more, they have a better relationship with the children, so they understand them better.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. Yeah. Sorry, Anna.
That's a very fair point, and I think that seems to be like the guiding thread of this entire discussion. It's like first and foremost about the relationships and that like on-hand knowledge about what the needs are and like what the strengths are, both in terms of like young people's strengths, but also school staff strengths. Do you want to add anything, Alex?
We've got a couple more comment requests. Andy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like charities and mental health professionals are down the bottom of the list, but I would argue that possibly they're top and bottom, because I'd like to think that in an ideal world, the DfE would sit down with all of those people who have the expertise to be able to advise the DfE about where to go with all of this. And then the DfE sets some parameters which schools and trusts can work within to create their own bespoke solutions, drawing on those charities, mental health professionals to provide support as they need it. So in many ways, I'd have them involved right at the beginning, but also involved with schools at the end of the process.
That's interesting. Yeah,
that's interesting. In a way, it's about delegating responsibility to experts rather than expecting the DfE to get it right from the first start.
You know, I just feel, you know, schools are fundamentally communities and relationships speak. And I think the idea, you know, I talk about kind of well-being being woven into the fabric of the school. I think to achieve that, it's really kind of primarily needs to start with those players that are already kind of integrated within the life of the school, and that is sort of fundamentally the DfE, the school themselves, the universities that the teachers have come through themselves, to give it the best chance of impact. Because I think if we start with external, there's risk that the school doesn't own it, and therefore I think that it makes it difficult for those initiatives then to thrive.
Interesting. Yeah. Sue, do you want to add something to that?
Well, I agree with what Mel's just said, and it's about very, very much about ownership. And one of the things that one of the professions that is underestimated are educational psychologists. Educational psychologists are both internal agents of change because they know schools, external agents of change. They're very knowledgeable about school systems. They're very knowledgeable about mental health. They're very knowledgeable about children and their learning. And if a service has a good relationship with a school, then it's one of the things that they could deliver for that school. And I think that is, I mean, I put other, I think, as third on mine because I thought it was just I keep wanting to think they're under-resourced. They are an underused resource, and they shouldn't just be there in order to do assessments.
That is such a good point. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to the next activity. So if you could go back to the My Role. Based on this organization of priorities, or responsibilities rather, I want us to think what role these organizations should play in filling the gaps in existing training and contributing to sustainable whole school strategies. So for the first 2-3 minutes, can you focus on the green post-its? There's essentially like 1 post-it per person. There's 12 post-its for each. You don't need to comment on every single one, but perhaps like your top 2 or 3. So about the role that you think charities, universities, research organizations, mental health professionals, etc. should have. So first one is, what role should they play to fill the gap? I see Anna B and some other person have already started. So I'm going to set the timer for 2-3 minutes for this one.
Can you add the link, Anna, back into the chat, please?
Yes.
While Anna's doing that, once you've put down on the green post-it what you think the role should be, so that the kind of what they could practically do to fill those gaps, the orange post-its are if you would like to add any more detail about how you feel that gap filling might contribute to the whole school mental health strategies overall. If you would like to share any kind of further thoughts or more detail, put those on the orange post-its to the right of the green ones.
Thank you, Alex. Yes. So the green one is what role, how does it look like? And then orange ones is how would that look like? And I guess an explanation as to why in the process.
Yeah, it's almost like the what and the why. What could they do and why would they do that? How is it going to help?
I want you to think about what your vision is for a school environment that fully supports mental health. What I'm gonna ask you to do is fill in with either one word or a short sentence to what you think that looks like or what you think that should look like.
That's shaping up really nicely. Some really thoughtful contributions. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like the non-pathologizing. I think that's really crucial and helpful.
Would anyone who's finished like to share any sort of concluding thoughts as we're coming to the end? Mel?
You know, I'd like to think that hopefully we have a school environment that fully supports mental health. We've recently had Ofsted, they, you know, feel that's the case, and I think the students in this school feel that's the case. And I think that is because I have some influence and autonomy and as a specialist, it's kind of specialist driven, but I'm born within the school, and that gives the opportunity for me to be part of the community, so that the approach to well-being is fully embedded, it's multifaceted. We encourage help seeking, we encourage self-referral. I suppose it's all about developing a fundamental culture that is, you know, as I was saying earlier, the plinth on which the rest of the school rests. And I think the backing of senior leaders has been hugely impactful in terms of our success in doing that.
Thank you, Mel. That's really helpful. Andy?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think having worked with this government, you know, they're very much about delivering things, and they've delivered mental health training to schools. But I think that word philosophy is so important. I think Anna mentioned it. You know, and we need to embed that philosophy in every school in the land. And it needs to have hearts and minds of staff. It needs to not be just another thing to do, but something that's a prerequisite, almost part of that safeguarding training that schools do every year when they update their understanding of keeping children safe in education. So I think the word philosophy, although the government don't like it particularly because it looks a bit lefty, I think philosophy is really important, and I think it's something that guides our daily work.
I couldn't agree more, Andy.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? Great.
I was just going to say a bit about, for me, where that comes from. So, like therapeutically, for me, my philosophy of how I view the world is how I then work out how to work with somebody and what might meet their need and what will help create change. And unless we have that, then you're on a bit of a hiding to nothing, because what you end up with is a pick and mix of things, and which is beautifully eclectic, but not particularly integrated. And if a lot of our troubles stem from feeling actually quite disintegrated, from not belonging, from not being connected, then modeling that in how you approach mental health doesn't help with that. So that's where I come from in my kind of worldview.
Thank you. Yeah, totally agree with you. Okay, so we're coming to the end. We've come to the end of our roundtable, but I wanted to thank you, everyone, not only for your engagement and your support, but in sharing about your expert opinion, but also being open and kind of being welcoming of this idea of brainstorming and thinking what the future should look like in terms of what, as more importance is being given to this issue, how should we construct it and how should we participate in it? Thank you so much. Any questions before we finish?
It's been such a pleasure hearing from you all. Thank you so much for making the time. It's been really, really interesting, and really grateful to you for your patience in sharing lots of different ideas on different topics with us in quite a short space of time. So thank you so much for making the time and joining us.
Thanks for organising.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
All the very best, everyone. Take care. Thank you.